Thank you very much for registering for this seminar. I'm Bob Toyofuku of Pacific Law Institute. And before we get started on the issues, let me introduce the panel for this morning. First, we have Senator Karl Rhoads, who's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and is completing his 20th year as a legislator, 10 in the House and 10 in the Senate. And he is decided after this session. Secondly, we have Senator Brendan Elefante, who is the current chair of the Labor and Technology Committee and is also a member of the Ways and Means Committee. He was elected in 2022 after serving 8 years in the Honolulu City Council as a council member. Next, we have Representative Linda Ichiyama, is Vice Speaker of the House and has been a representative for the past 15 years. She recently, before becoming Vice Speaker, was Chair of the Water and Land Committee. Lastly, we have Representative Chris Todd from the Big Island, Hawai'i Island, who is the new Chair of the House Finance Committee and has been a representative since 2017 and has been a member of the House for the past 9 years. Before we begin, I have 2 housekeeping matters. If you have any questions, write them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as possible as time permits. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to answer more questions. If you need to utilize captions, press the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then press Requests. We will cover a variety of issues this morning, but I want to take 5 minutes to review and update some relevant information for you. First, remember to visit the legislative website where you will be able to get all of the basic information for the session. Schedule, important deadlines, phone numbers, email addresses. And I'm mentioning this because there have been changes in both the House and the Senate with regard to committee membership. Also, check the Public Access Room segment on the legislative website, which is very, very helpful. And by the way, it is www.capital.hawaii.gov. The same basic procedures in 2025 will be followed during this upcoming session. You will still need to show your ID to enter the Capitol, and I think they will be checking your bags as well. Okay, next, what about some changes in the Senate and the House? First of all, changes in the Senate. The leadership is the same. Senator Aquino retired from the Senate, and Representative Rochelle Lamosao was appointed and is now a senator. The Higher Education Committee was deleted, and Senator Donna Mercado Kim is the new chair of the Education Committee. As I mentioned, Senator Elefante is the new chair of Labor and Technology. Because of these changes, I am recommending that you check the membership of the several committees because of reassignments in the Senate. Changes in the House. The leadership was changed in 2025 and remains the same, except Representative Kirsten Kahaloa now is the Majority Caucus leader, replacing Representative Chris Todd, who, as I mentioned, was appointed as the new Finance Committee chair. As of note, there were 11 members in 2025, plus Representative Joe Gideon, who replaced Representative Gene Ward, who unfortunately passed away. So together with 18 new members elected in 2022, there are 30 out of 51 recent members in the House. I hope this has been helpful. Before we begin going into the details and the issues that the Senate and the House and the legislature as a whole will take up. Because of the various federal actions that are currently happening, we will also discuss the impact to our state will or may do to address the problems that arise. So let me start off with Senator Karl Rhoads, who will give a quick overview of what issues the Senate will be considering. Senator Rhoads?
Thank you. Thanks, Bob, for having me again. It's my pleasure to address everybody today for a few minutes. We do have the new chair of the Finance Committee, and also someone from Ways and Means. So I will try not to step on their lines, but I do think that a lot of what's going to be happening this coming session is going to be just trying to figure out how to handle what's going on in Washington. There's a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty is probably one of the biggest problems. We just don't know what's going to come out of Washington. Although I would say this year is probably less uncertain than last year, because last year we really didn't know what was going to happen. We had Doge, and it was supposed to save money, but it ended up costing money, and it was just all this chaos. This time around, I think it's a little clearer what the federal administration is trying to do. They're sending a lot of functions that used to be federal functions, or some significant ones anyway, to the states. They've cut back significantly on SNAP, the food stamps program. They're cutting a lot of money from what we call MedQuest, Medicaid. The one that's, I think, not gotten a lot of attention, but probably is in some ways the scariest, is that it looks like what they're trying to do with the Federal Emergency Management, not the association, administration, is to make the states take care of all catastrophes. So if the Lahaina fire had happened now, I don't know where we would be, because we relied on FEMA a lot during that period, and we got a lot of money from them. And how we deal with that is going to be difficult. Do we try to maintain the same benefits for SNAP and MedQuest? Do we have to build up our own? We have to build up Hawai'i to take the place of FEMA? These are largely money questions, and so I just will just mention them as big picture stuff. And of course, the whole reason for it was so that the Republicans could give continued deep tax cuts to the wealthy and to corporate interests. And the cuts that they made to the social safety net and the FEMA don't even make up for it. It doesn't pay for those tax cuts. It just partially pays for it. So there's already, well, I'll let the money guys talk about how we'll deal with that, but it's a very difficult question. The other parts of the federal stuff that will probably affect us here in Hawaii is, what they're doing with the economy. Many of the things three big things that the feds are doing are on their own by themselves, other things being equal, are inflationary. Trump keeps pounding on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Well, sometimes that's the correct course of action, but it does tend to be inflationary. He's chasing out low income labor, or low wage labor, as fast as he can. That if whoever takes those jobs, if anybody does, they'll get paid more, and that tends to be inflationary. And the other thing the tariffs tend to be inflationary as well. I don't think that has ended up being as big an issue as we thought it might, because a lot of them never went into effect. He was making threats all over the world about this and that, 100% tariffs on this, 100% on that. But most of them didn't go through, which is probably a blessing. This saying that's going around, taco, Trump always chickens out. Well, there are certain things you want him to chicken out on. I don't, when you have a bad idea, you should back away from it as soon as you can. Having said all that, all the issues that have been before us for many of the years that I've been in the legislature that we've worked on, but are not close to solving. Affordable housing, the cost of living in the state is very high. Affordable housing is going to continue to be a salient issue for the Senate and I'm sure for the House too, which is a big chunk of the cost of living. But of course, there are other parts of the cost of living that factor in as well: price of food, transportation. Climate change, again, the Trump administration is doing us no favors because they deny that it's even happening. But when you have your main economic engine of the state in Waikiki and it's about 2 feet above sea level, something's got to give there probably sooner or later if we keep going on the course we're going. So, that is going to continue to be an issue in terms of both doing our part to mitigate. Of course, we're a tiny place, but we do have for our size, we do have a pretty good sized carbon footprint. Having said that, we're also way ahead of most states in terms of what we're doing about it. So, sort of a mixed bag there. But when you've
Karl,
got, yeah,
excuse me, since you mentioned climate change, I just want to tell the audience there was an article in the Star Advertiser maybe a couple days ago uh, regarding a report by the Council on Strategic Risks that talked about what is happening and the impact on Hawaii because of we're very vulnerable. And for those of you that are interested in climate change issues, take a look at the Star Advertiser. It was a very informative
yes,
article. Thanks, Karl.
it's well, and I think the island that's most at risk is Oahu because of Waikiki and also because of a lot of our infrastructure. Not to say that the other islands won't be affected, but Hawaii County, of course, is a very tall mountain, so at least there's a place to go. Um, Other issues that will probably come up: recreational marijuana has been out there for ages. Either the Senate or the House has always managed to kill it. So I don't know. I don't really have a very good fix on what's going to happen, but it will continue to be an issue. People have been trying to get some kind of gaming in Hawaii for decades. I don't think the votes are there, but I'm assuming that it will come up again. I think that's pretty close to my 7 minutes, so I will stop there and I'll look forward to the other presentations. Mahalo.
Okay. Before you sign off for right now on the overview, do you think the Senate will take up anything with regard to immigration because of what's happening on the mainland?
Yeah, well, yes, there will be some other reactions to Trump having to do with whether law enforcement agents can wear masks and go about their business under normal circumstances anonymously. Other states have passed laws that say they can't. This horrible incident in Minnesota yesterday highlights the importance of that. Although the person who shot the woman, the ICE agent who shot the woman, didn't have a mask on at the time of the shooting, so we do know who he was, but obviously that's a problem. There's a number of issues having to do with uh, uh, reproductive rights that will come up again. How much will the state cooperate with the federal government in terms of chasing down out of status immigrants unless they've been convicted of something, in which case we will cooperate. Um, so yeah, there's some other ones, but I think the real action is on the money side because of the actions and uncertainties coming from the feds in terms of the budget.
Thank you, Senator. Uh, Let me now turn to Senator Elefante. And just to let the audience know, he was the chair of public safety uh, last year. And so one of the things that he and I discussed was, what is going to happen because of certain cuts. And Senator Rhoads mentioned FEMA and other things with regard to disaster preparedness, because we're subject to wildfires, potential hurricanes, and how is the legislature going to focus on that?
First of all, Happy New Year, everyone, and happy Aloha Friday. Thank you to Bob and everyone to coordinate this and to my fellow colleagues for being on here. And I think Senator Rhoads really touched upon it. Him and I did serve on public safety and military affairs. So I'll start off with FEMA. He did talk about how the impact of FEMA is sort of unknown. That is true. We don't know what the current occupant of the White House and this administration will be doing. that would cost more money for states to upfront it. So what we've seen in Lahaina, where we had a lot of FEMA help from Bob Filton and the federal agencies, we may not get that going forward. So at a recent Ways and Means briefing this week, I did ask Administrator Barros from FEMA, actually not from FEMA, but our Hawai'i administrator, if this is something we need to account for in this supplemental budget. Not necessary at this time. A lot of it that we're seeing coming down from the federal level specifically has to do with kind of a wait and see. And that makes it difficult for us as elected officials in terms of how we budget for that. Now, with that being said, I know there's also some things that we've seen during the federal government shutdown with SNAP benefits cutting off, or the state has had to supplement that. That reimbursement is going down from 50 to 25% from the federal level. So a lot of that money will be borne on by the cost of us as local taxpayers and those that pay into our tax revenue. Also with Medicare, Medicaid, those are critical issues, especially on the Medicaid side, in terms of what states have to upfront those costs. And so in a recent testimony from the Department of Taxation, and I'll just give you some figures for those to be aware. In their supplemental budget, it's 45 million in general funds and 64.4 million in federal funds to just maintain access and care. So a lot of these costs, normally we wouldn't upfront that. Now it's being shifted for us, right, at the state level. So this is something that we kind of have to watch and see as lawmakers. I do think with the Council of Revenues, and perhaps Chair Todd can talk more about this in that sense, is that with the last meeting that they had on January 7th, a few days ago, it's relatively flat. So we kind of know, going forward of kind of what we need to kind of embrace for specifically. And so that makes it tough. But I want to also go back to, maybe some of you, this is your first time being on this call, or maybe you're a repeat. And things that come to mind that we hear from constituents are, quality of life issues, housing issues. It's becoming too expensive to live in Hawaii. So what are we lawmakers doing to provide more housing units, provide, having better jobs? How are we attracting that, lowering costs? These are issues we tackle every session, right? And it's always a finite amount of resources, scarcity of resources, and how we basically make sure that we fund programs. I'm not sure if many people know, but education is sort of our number one priority. It funds a big portion of our state budget. So education is critical. And, with the federal government and looking at dismantling the Department of Education at the federal level, and with federal funds and all that, there's always a lot of shifting going on to that. But going back to quality of life, I want to just focus for a second. Many of you might be homeowners. Some of you might be renting. Some of you might be in the process of finding a home. There's a recent study done by DBED several years back that we would need 25,000 units by 2035. And for the city and county of Honolulu, if you live on Oahu, that's about 13,500 units. And so with that comes cost of infrastructure, acquisition of land. Where do we build that? So we've made a concerted effort at the state level to look at developing workforce housing, affordable housing, putting more money into a rental housing trust fund and other pockets, and looking at transit-oriented development. I've always been a big supporter of Skyline. I don't know if many of you have wrote on it, but part of that was to also build around the stations like you've seen in other states or other countries throughout the world. So those are critical issues. I think, as we go forward, we need to make sure that we're sort of aware of. And, we're anticipating, with Governor Green, and, we did roll back a lot of income tax credits and deductions, which was one of the biggest bills that we did pass. So we might have to look at the higher earning income tax earners and see, do we roll back some of that so that we make sure that we pass a balanced budget going forward. I'll stop there. I think I've shared a little more on
you have a lot of time.
Oh, it's a lot of time. Okay, I know sometimes I talk fast, so and I would also say too, one thing that is really significant is a lot of people, there's just a lot of unknown, a lot of uncertainty. I think Senator Rhoads touched upon it. It was really uncertain coming in this year, even though there's still some level of uncertainty. And part of our job as we go through the 60 days of session and working all together, it doesn't matter if you're House or Senate, is really to deliver goods and services to you folks, to your families, to make sure that there's working infrastructure, there's, that it's for the taxes, or we have a finite amount of money to provide for resources that we need, whether it's for infrastructure, freeways, roads, airports, harbors, things of that nature, law enforcement. I know this probably wasn't brought up, but I'll just mention it here because I sat some time on public safety. Fireworks, right? The legislature, all of us collectively here, we did an effort to basically pass meaningful bills to hopefully make an impact on that. And anecdotally, talking to folks from around the city and county of Honolulu, is they did notice, a sort of a reduction in the amount of illegal fireworks going on. But that does take time in terms of enforcement and prosecuting cases. But we do feel that what we've put in place has been significant to get after the egregious offenders, and even those that are lighting legal fireworks, the citations and all that. And hopefully that sends a clear message going forward to the communities, like, we may have seen this in the past, but what's happened with the Aliamanu tragedy, this is not acceptable for health and safety reasons going forward. I think I'll stop there. And then Bob, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to ask during my time here.
Well, Senator, I'll bring it up now because you were talking about housing. And I've never really talked about it a lot with any legislator. But has there been any discussion about creating affordable rentals? Because even affordable housing, there's a great deal of the segment can't afford it anyway. So, but if you had affordable rentals, that would help with the housing situation. Has there been any discussion on that at all?
There has always been discussion on affordable rentals. And just to maybe provide context to the audience here. So Bob mentioned that I served 8 years at the city council. I was termed out. The last 2 years I served as zoning and planning chair, which we focused on whether it's affordable housing projects. And one of my efforts was to attempt to get more affordable rental housing projects online, regardless of age, especially for the most needed population. Sometimes that could be the kapuna, first time people coming into the market that need for that. So we need to build sort of at all levels, which includes rentals. This will be my first year that I'll be on the committee on housing. And I'm really looking forward to working with Senator Chang, who's the chair on the Senate side, to see what we can do to provide for more affordable rentals in that sense, so that we can get some of those that may not want to purchase, right off the bat, but may just want to get into a rental. So eventually providing them enough savings so that going forward, they can have enough to make a down payment. And it's not easy. I think many folks that I know, close friends and people, they had to have had help, or you live in a multi-generational home just to afford to live here. But the saying goes, right? Do you want to be sort of a little poor and live in paradise, or do you want to be poor and live in the Midwest where it's freezing and cold, right? I would rather choose, getting by, even though it's not really a good choice, living in paradise, because of our culture, because we have aloha, and because, we do a lot of things different than the continent. And Bob, can I talk about one more thing if you don't mind?
Sure, go ahead.
So I think a lot of our economy and revenues is also based on tourism. And during COVID, we've seen what that's like without tourists coming here, whether it's to, Maui, to Oahu, Big Island, Kauai, one of our islands, right? And so relatively speaking, spending has slowly gone up. And what we don't have is we don't have a lot of that Japanese visitor, the high earner visitor, because of the exchange rate coming back. There's a big reduction in that, I think close to like 10% prior to COVID. Interesting enough, in a recent presentation from DBED, they have shared with us that visitors from the US East and US West Coast, the East Coast, have actually increased and has really provided, north of 70% of our visitors coming in. And where we really lost is the visitors from Canada. So I say that because that is a big part of our economy, tourism is, and primarily that brings in revenue, brings in TAT, GAT, and that helps us, keep our economy going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Okay, let's now turn to the House, and I'll have Vice Speaker Linda Ichiyama talk about some of the general issues that the House will be considering this session.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you so much for having us and for putting together this amazing panel. It's a privilege to be here. So the House Majority Caucus met over the interim, and we talked about some of our key priorities that we'll be looking at this coming session. I'd like to highlight 3 of them. There will be more, so this is not a complete list, but there are 3 that I wanted to highlight. And the first actually kind of builds off a topic that we've already been discussing, and that's building more housing. We recognize that for folks in Hawaii, one of the biggest drivers of cost of living is the cost of housing. And that's whether you're renting or paying a mortgage, right? It's a big part of what people are paying to live in paradise. So we're continuing on the work that we did last year. Our majority package last year included additional funding for Tier 2 workforce housing, to build more housing, not just for the low income, folks who are making like 80% or less of area media income, but also, our working families, our nurses, our teachers, our police officers, even those folks who we've traditionally considered as good paying jobs are struggling, and some of them are even considered Alice families. So we really wanted to make sure that we were building more workforce housing. So we appropriated over $100 million additional funding to build more housing last year. We also appropriated funds to Ohana zones and really passed a bill to make a law to make it more structured and really put some guardrails and ask the administration to be accountable for the Ohana zones funding that we've been giving them for the past several years. So we hope to continue that work, and also adding to Senator Elefante's point, we recognize the need absolutely for more rental housing. We realize that there's a ladder that people move up, right? You move out of your parents' house, you start renting a place, you try to save for a down payment, and then maybe you buy yourself a studio. And then, right, as you get married, you have a family, maybe you're looking for a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, and you may start out in an apartment or a townhouse, and then you move to a single family home. But we really need to make sure that we are building housing along that spectrum so that people can continue to move up that ladder, and we continually have space for people to move up in that housing ladder. The second part of what we're looking at to increase the number of housing units being built is regulatory reform. So last year, our housing chair, Luke Evelyn, worked very closely with the housing chair in the Senate, Senator Stanley Chang, to reduce what has been a very significant bottleneck in housing, and that's the historic preservation review. We're always conscious of the need to balance between protecting sacred cultural areas and places, but also to not be so overly burdensome that we're completely halting or stopping the building of new housing units. And so last year, the legislature passed a significant bill to implement timelines as well as more clear processes for SHPD review. And so we also focused on transit-oriented development areas, and that review would be expedited in those TOD districts. So we're continuing that this session, looking at more regulatory reform. You may have seen the SPEED task force led by House Economic Development Chair Gregor Iligan. They just adopted the recommendations regarding historic preservation review, individual wastewater systems, as well as building permits. So that was a lot of work that was put in throughout the interim. And then they'll be starting to look at a new set of questions in the next coming months. So please stay tuned for what the SPEED task force is working on. The second area that the Majority Caucus will be looking at is preserving the social safety net. And I think we've already touched upon, the effects that the changes that the federal government are making to SNAP and Medicaid have serious impact on our local families. And we saw that during the government shutdown when SNAP benefits were cut and not available, and the state had to step in to set up an emergency program to make sure that people would be able to put food on the table. So a lot of the changes will probably take effect the federal changes will take effect in 2027, but we need to start getting prepared for them now. And that includes, for example, the requirement for Medicaid, the new requirement for work, for people to verify their eligibility for Medicaid by showing that they're working. That's something that Medicaid has never had to do before, and so require a lot of new processes, administrative functions. We're also being asked by the federal government to pick up more on the administrative side for cost sharing for the food stamp program for SNAP. And so these are all things that we are struggling and working on, but it is a priority for the House to make sure that we preserve that safety net. We think that's really critical. And then the last thing that I wanted to highlight is economic development in terms of workforce development. Last year, the Majority Caucus focused on the Hele Emua program, which is actually building off a program started by Senator Donovan De La Cruz to have internships in state government. It was a successful program. We wanted to create the pipeline to have people come and intern with the state government and learn how great it is to work here, and then hopefully after they graduate, to come back and work for us full time. So we saw the success of that and we expanded it last year to the private sector. And so we really want to give high school, college students the ability to work during the summer to get that hands-on experience in industries where we know there's a lot of need, like healthcare. So we want to build on that success of those programs. We're also looking at, for example, expanding some of the workforce development programs that allow people who are already working to gain additional certifications, working with our community colleges, or glide paths, for example, for people who are already certified in one thing, but then can build upon that and get more experience and more credentials. So I know that was a lot. I'll pause there, Bob, if you have any questions or wanted to.
I think maybe Chris will talk about it too, but feel free to talk about it, Vice Speaker. There's some move on the mainland to increase minimum wage. And, I'll just raise it. I don't know if that's even under consideration with, this economic situation here, which we'll talk about after we go through some of these general issues. But I just wanted to bring that up. We can talk about that later.
I'll just note that the schedule of increases that we passed several years ago for the minimum wage, one of them just went into effect this past January. So January 1, the minimum wage in Hawaii increased to $16 an hour. I think we have one more scheduled increase to go. And so I think that's all going to be part of the conversation this session.
Just in one mentioned in the chat, and I'm looking at that. So somebody mentioned that I heard from friends that even the new affordable, quote unquote, workforce rentals are priced too high. They work but cannot afford these rents often. I just wanted somebody mentioned that.
That's a fair point, and that's something that I hear from family and friends as well.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come back. There's so many issues. And, I want to repeat, the panel is looking at a lot of possible money issues because of the changes made or suggested by the federal government. So, and it does impact us. So that's why we're talking about it. But let me go to Representative Todd and as the new chair of finance, what are the specific issues? And we're going to go into the economic issues next, but what are some of the specific issues other than what Vice Speaker mentioned that will be on the table of this session?
Sure, and I think folks who spoke before me deferred a little bit on some of the finance-related questions, but touched on it briefly. We have a pretty substantial budget problem right now, and it's kind of a confluence of a few different things. One is the economy in general across the United States slowing down and across the world. Some of it is changes at the federal level, which have direct impact on us and also indirect. So, I think Rep. Ichiyama and others have touched on our state's cost share for what's been federal programming, things like Medicaid and SNAP. So added burdens to the state budget. And that doesn't even take into account how willing we are to actually step into programming to make up for federal eligibility changes. Is the state going to step into those obligations, which have previously been the federal government's obligations? So all of those things have kind of combined to cause us some substantial kind of heartburn. And then you add into that we did pass substantial changes to the income tax within our state, the largest tax cut in state history. And unfortunately, that timing has lined up almost exactly with these changes to our economic outlook and federal budget picture. So I think our largest thing, the one thing we have to do this session, regardless of what else gets done, is make sure that we lay out changes that will ensure that our state budget is sound and secure. There are some short-term implications if we don't do that. The state bond rating is at risk, which means compounding future expenses because it costs us more to fund infrastructure and projects if our bond rating goes down. But also just making sure that we can be responsible as an employer and as a provider of services. If we have a disruption to services or have to deal with things like furloughs or disruption to employment, that just makes things worse for everyone here. So our first responsibility is to ensure that is secure. And that's going to require some tough decisions, likely around that income tax picture. I think the governor has already spoke to his willingness, and we had a briefing yesterday from the director of the Department of Budget and Finance, and they're going to be putting forward a proposal that will suspend the future implementation of those income tax changes. So basically, everything that's gone into effect to this date will stay in place. That's their proposal. And everything prospective that would go into effect in 2027 on, that would basically just be suspended indefinitely. I know that they're going to be proposing some actual kind of means tested low to middle income tax credits to try and account for the fact that we're suspending what would have been kind of rolling tax changes for folks over the next few years. But somewhere in that proposal, and the House's shot at it, and the Senate's vision for how we're going to fix this, we're gonna have to figure it out. I think the main thing, and my main priority, is in any attempt to deal with our budget, we make sure that burden is not placed on folks who cannot afford to pay more already. There's no sense in putting additional financial burden on folks who are already either receiving government assistance or really struggling to make ends meet and are caught in that middle where they don't have enough income to really thrive here in Hawaii, but they don't qualify for a lot of government programs and aid. So we want to make sure that if we do have to place additional burden on folks financially, it's on those that actually have capacity to pay, and those who have benefited largely from the income tax cuts we already put into place, but also those that are being proposed by the Trump administration. So that's kind of the overlying, big picture issue. In addition, there are some structural issues within our state that I think we're all well aware of. I think part of it is over the last 30 to 40 years, the growth in wages and just in our economy in general here in Hawaii has lagged behind every single year, right? Behind the mainland. So if you go back to the 70s and 80s, I think affordability and lifestyle here in Hawaii was pretty comparable to an average state. And every year it's just been a little bit flat, which has meant over time we've really lagged behind, and it's become very unattainable for a lot of local families, which is why people have moved away and why people have very high amounts of consumer debt and housing debt. So until we solve those structural issues, it's going to continue to be difficult. And those are very there's no silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of people coming together. It's going to take continued effort year over year. There are some things we can do that make a large impact around our tax code and restructuring who pays what. And then there are going to be smaller efforts also. But, I think that's also something I'm concerned about. If you look at studies of what percentage of income people pay in local and state taxes here in Hawaii, people at the very bottom and people in the middle class end up paying a higher percentage of their income than folks who are doing very well for themselves. And I think in the 9 years I've been in office, not that this has been something that I am responsible for, but we have made substantial progress on that end of things. I don't think people are feeling that, but when I got into office in 2017, ITEP, which kind of compiles some of this data, they're kind of a national think tank. They ranked Hawaii 49th out of 50 states in terms of how progressive our tax code is at the local and state level. And right now we're about middle of the pack. So there's been progress, but it's been very incremental. And I do think that one thing I've struggled with is it doesn't feel like we treat things like the crisis that they frequently are, whether it's housing or affordability or low wage growth or even things like our basic just routine repairs and maintenance and our crumbling infrastructure. So, I think there are a lot of people in positions of power within our state who see things similarly. And I do think that you're going to see more drastic action. But proof is in the pudding. And this year is going to be a big year for resetting things.
Representative, another question, and I think Senator Rhoads raised it on recreational marijuana, and apparently Chair Tarnas from Judiciary will consider it, but because it has fiscal implications, it may go to finance. But do you have a sense of where the House is on this particular issue?
Sure.
I mean, it's been around for a long time.
Right, and I've been consistent and on record that I'm personally supportive, and it would kind of depend on how we structure it. I do think that we're in a position to learn from how other states have implemented and what not to do. I think one of the failures in many of the states that were early adopters is that they overregulated to the point where the legal operations could not compete with the black market. So there's a balance to strike, and I think Rep Tarnas and Chair Tarnas is trying to do that along with Senator Rhoads. I would not expect a bill to pass this year, partly because I do not think that there is enough support in the House. But never say never. I do think that this is something where this past year felt like the first time that there was a reasonable chance for it to actually move in the 9 years I've been in office. And I do think that positions and views within the legislature are evolving. Some of it may come down to the specific language. There are all kinds of models that could be proposed, whether you're putting it to a vote, through some sort of constitutional amendment that's been proposed, whether you're doing some sort of delegation to counties to have the regulatory authority instead of making it top down, or whether you introduce some sort of trigger law where you have a structure in place so that if the federal government fully deschedules or legalizes, that we're not caught off guard and really overrun with kind of mainland corporate interests coming in to monetize because we haven't prepared. So we'll see. And like I said, never say never, but I don't think there's quite enough support in the House at the moment.
Last question before we go more into the economy and the budget and other fiscal issues. Because you were, let's see, a couple years ago now, transportation chair in the House. Do you have any comment, or is it sort of too premature with regard to the extension of the GET, General Excise Tax, to? I mean, that's been coming up in the media.
Sure, and a few months ago, I was given assurances that this would not be proposed this year. And that very quickly changed in November, December, and now we're anticipating it to be part of the mayor's packages this year as some form of extension. I think we just got to vet out the specifics of what's being proposed. So we're kind of taking a wait and see approach. I do think we have enough time where this does not need to be dealt with this specific year, especially with all of the major changes and all of the uncertainty that's been referenced. I prefer to just keep our eye on the ball, because anytime you discuss the rail, it really sucks all the air out of the room. And I'm not sure we're going to have the capacity for that, given all of the challenges that are in place. But largely, hey, every time I go anywhere that's not Hawaii, I'm blown away by public transportation. We are so far behind. I am a supporter of the project, provided that we can do it in a more cost-effective way that really benefits local working class people, removes their need for a car, and at least gives them the option to commute in that way. It's good for everyone. So supportive in concept, but I don't know if this is the year. We'll see.
Okay, thank you, Rep. Todd. Okay, let's now move specifically to the economic and budget issues. And because Senator Elefante and Representative Todd are with the money committees, I want to make sure that Rep. Ichiyama and Senator Rhoads also participate as we go through this. But let me now turn to Senator Elefante as a member of WHAM, Ways and Means. As far as you can tell at this point, what will be the focus? And Rep. Todd also talked already about the tax changes that passed in 2024. And then Senator Rose talked about subsidies. But what's the future revenue and economic estimates that the audience need to know about?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And Rep Todd, did talk a lot about it. So thank you to Rep Todd for sharing that and all of us collectively here on the panel. For those of you that may not be familiar with the legislative process, if I can just sort of back up a few steps, is that we're entering our supplemental year, which is the second year of our biennial budget. So drastic changes, you don't really have a full kind of realm of that. It's just more adds or additions per se. But in saying all that, I know Rep Todd mentioned about budget and finance coming in with their proposal to, not implement the future income tax changes for sort of the higher income earners, that have the capacity to do that. That's a big part of lost revenue that we have. And just to kind of give you an idea, which would include a portion of that for fiscal year 26, the changes that we implemented, which also includes GET exemption for services for healthcare, which includes patients who are on Medicaid or Medicare or TRICARE benefits. So there'll be exemption from that. For 26, specifically just the income tax credits alone and what we passed several years back, it's close to about $630 million of lost revenue that we would have. But aside from that, while we may be able to give out exemptions and tax cuts, we also have to look at creative ways of how we can receive revenue. And so for this coming fiscal year 26 and into 27, we did pass some other things, TAT on cruise ships and on the hotels, 0.75%. So we'll start to see a little trickle of that come in, but it doesn't obviously match with, the changes that are coming through. So it is a balancing act that we do have to do, and we have to see it as we go forward. And I did bring up tourism in my last session and talking a few minutes ago, is because we do rely on that. They do pay into the GET and TET to provide for that. And we've looked at other ways that we could, think of how we could bring in revenue. Last session in creative ways, but at the end of the day, we do have to pass a sound, solid budget that is balanced going forward, so that the most vulnerable population, doesn't suffer as much and don't have the hardest of impacts.
Rep. Todd, you wanted to make, by the way, on my screen, I think I had some problems with either the camera or the computer because my photo goes in and out, and I apologize for that.
It's okay. We can hear you clearly. Okay, so Senator Elefante touched on it, and I think gave a pretty good summary of where we're at. I think the net impact, essentially what happens is we have a constitutional obligation to pass a balanced budget, right? We're not like the federal government where we can print money and figure things out that way. So over the course of our financial plan, which is a 6-year running period, we need to make sure that we're largely in the black. The problem is, we have this entity, the Council on Revenues. They meet quarterly, and we base our budget off of their projections. It's a collection of state economists, very, very bright and capable people analyzing a ton of data. In the last calendar year, their projection over that 6-year financial plan for where we are in terms of our state revenue and our outlook has gone down by almost $3 billion, which, we are not a large state. That is a substantial sum of money and essentially would, completely eat into our existing balance, which I think has been kind of responsibly cared for coming out of COVID, and our rainy day fund. It would almost completely deplete everything we have and put us in a really dire situation. We also have to take into account that with federal uncertainty, things could get worse. It's also possible that over the next year, we see additional reductions in that projection. I think it's pretty telling that the administration's financial plan, which is a public document and was recently released, they're proposing changes to the income tax plan that would generate, relative to letting it just continue to be implemented, about $1.8 billion over that period, which may or may not be enough. It kind of depends on who you ask. I think they're painting a picture that's a little too rosy in some situations, but people can agree to disagree on that analysis. I do think it's telling, though, that even with that adjustment, because that takes time to change and implement, their projection is that we will have a deficit in fiscal year 27 of over $700 million. Now, we currently have the reserves to withstand that. But if that's what I think most folks would consider a rosy projection, then what does that mean for our ability to really sustain in the short run, but also establish a state government and rebuild a state government that can allow people to thrive? Survival isn't enough. We have a lot of areas where we're falling short. And I think beyond that, there's some interesting things we'd like to address. And to do so, we need to make sure that we're safe and secure, because that's kind of the bare minimum. If we want to tackle these large statewide problems, we need to first make sure that we're taking care of the bare minimums, which we're currently kind of failing to do.
On the issue of Obamacare and Medicaid, I think Medicaid will be a problem moving forward that Vice Speaker had mentioned and Senator Elefante. But apparently on ACA and Obamacare, I just read this morning, the House did pass a bill to extend the subsidies. But now the question is whether the United States Senate is going to pass a similar bill to extend the tax subsidies to alleviate the problem that has been created with no extension of the subsidies. So hopefully that will be taken care of. Senator Elefante or Chris or Rep. Ichiyama, Senator Rhoads, any comment on what the not-for-profit should do and the granting aids? Because, it does look like it's going to be a difficult year with regard to the finances and revenue. Who wants to go?
I'll go. This is Karl. Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to Chair Todd and Chair Dela Cruz whether there'll be any grant and aids. But my impression at this point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there will be some. We did have, I think, right at the end of COVID, or maybe during COVID, there was a year where we didn't have any at all. I don't think that's where we're at, but I think it's fair to say that the competition will be. There'll be a lot of people applying for a limited pool of money.
Senator Elefante, this is a procedural question. Usually when Ways and Means has their hearings, a lot of it is decision-making only. And what suggestions do you have for people that would like to see a bill pass or even defeated when there's really not as much opportunity for verbal testimony, and it's for the substantive committee handles the bill, then it goes to Ways and Means, and a lot of times it's decision DM only. So, what suggestions do you have for people that are involved with the Ways and Means bills?
Yeah, thank you. This is only my second year on Ways and Means, so I'm not considered sort of a subject matter expert in this space. But when I came into this space, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting and different. And it's usually decision making is usually if a bill has already been first heard uh, by a previous subject matter committee and was referred to Ways and Means, and usually it's just decision making. However, having said that, members of the public can still submit testimony directly to the chair and vice chair, Chair Dela Cruz, Vice Chair Moriwaki, and members. There's 13 members on Ways and Means. And in addition to that, you can also send your written testimony and comments to your area elected officials as well, or those that you may, feel might have a knowledge of the subject matter, or you may want to share those thoughts. You could directly email us, you could call our office, whatever that may be. So that's one way of doing that to get your message out and sharing your voice and thoughts because at the end of the day, we're not all experts in all this. We do rely on the public testimony, and those that may have, expertise or knowledge in this field, that's very helpful for us as information. And we do review testimony. We do look at it regardless if it's written or verbal testimony.
Yeah, I just want to mention that whenever I had to deal with Ways and Means, I would always send in written testimony, even though I know it's going to be decision making only. And as a tip, you really need to go in and talk to one of the Ways and Means members to articulate your position on on the bill that you're interested in. Rep. Ichiyama, do you have any comments with regard to, the economy estimates or future revenues from just your general information, as part of House leadership?
I would just echo,
Rep. Todd covered a lot of it, but go ahead.
I would echo what everyone else has said that that is really going to be the hot topic this year is the state budget and figuring out what can we afford, right? What are our wants? What are the nice to have? And what are our needs? What do we need to have? What do we need to do? And that's always a tough call. It's never an easy decision. I would just note for the audience that the January Council on Revenues maintained the current projections, but they will meet again in March. And so that's typically when the budget transitions from the House to the Senate. And so if they lower the projections in March, then those are the projections that we have to meet when we pass the budget in May at the end of session. And then the Council on Revenues will meet again in June, and that's the projection that the governor has to use when he's deciding on line item vetoes or what can we afford, right? So it's always a little bit like we're chasing this moving target, and we'll just have to wait and see what the economy looks like then.
Thank you, Rep. Ichiyama. One other issue that we haven't touched on, is there going to be any legislation with regard to AI, artificial intelligence, this year?
I would expect so. I think it's an emergent tech, not emerging. It's a very helpful, prevalent technology and something that I think we are all looking at in various ways. We were just in a meeting with Senator Kochi the other day, and he talked about how they're using AI programs in Kauai elementary schools to help students learn to read, right? So there are so many different ways that AI is being used. The University of Hawaii is, also looking at expanding their AI research and offerings in terms of courses and certificates. So, as often happens at the legislature, we're keeping up. We're trying to keep up with the technology and how it's changing, and whether that's going to be autonomous vehicles one day or, how does AI operate in our policy space? I would expect so.
Thank you. Rep. Todd, one other question, because you're the new finance chair. It's the issue of bills being referred to finance. And when you and I talk, I think it would be helpful for you to explain, what bills actually go to finance because of the fiscal implication.
Sure. It's been subject to a lot of conversation, and it's something that last year I was part of that referral committee on the House side alongside Vice Speaker Ichiyama, and that was my first time really taking a look at it. And I think the first thing that maybe goes a little bit misunderstood is we have no time. You really are just trying to blast through it as fast as possible. Try to make an educated decision that makes sense, that provides a fair path for a bill and to our chairs and to the public. So that's the first thing to understand. I think it's a philosophical question for certain things. Anything with an appropriation, just in its nature, pretty much has to go to the Finance and Ways and Means Committee. And that's just right off the top. And many, many bills have appropriations or create positions within state government and require appropriations. So that's kind of a given. That next area is where it's somewhat open to interpretation, which is fiscal impact. And that it kind of depends on how broadly you're going to define that. Do we have a policy decision that does not have a direct cost to the state and does not touch the tax code, but if we do this thing, it will affect tax collections in the future, right? And some of that's kind of a judgment call of where you draw that line. I think my intent is to try and release some of those things that are somewhat marginal to other chairs. But ultimately, we have to see on what's proposed. This past year, which the Civil Beat failed to report, even though we gave them this exact information when they asked for it, which was very, very irritating, if I'm being honest. There was a big priority for Speaker Nakamura. We had 200 fewer pieces of legislation go through the Finance Committee when compared with 2 years ago, which was the first year of the biennium. So we already made a substantial change, but I think the intent this year is to take another close look and really find those bills that are maybe don't quite merit a Finance Committee discussion. But again, it's for reference. About 2/3 of bills end up with a Finance and Ways and Means referral. In a given year, that means about 1,000 House bills and Senate bills, give or take. The Judiciary Committee on the House and Senate side, they end up with close to half of all legislation, so 700 to 800 pieces of legislation. And the Consumer Protection Committees end up with around 250 to 300. And those are the three committees that have kind of the broadest responsibilities.
Maybe, Bob, if I can just add to that. I think what a lot of people may not understand is that the Ways and Means committees and the Finance committees are not strict appropriation committees. They're not committees on appropriations. They also have jurisdiction over, exactly as Chair Todd said, revenue, right? So bills that affect the economy, bills that affect business, bills that affect how revenue will be generated in Hawaii also have a financial impact. And so if we took a very, hard line, strict approach of only bills that have appropriations go to the Finance and Ways and Means Committee, there really is no other committee with jurisdiction that would look at how revenue will be impacted. And that's a really important responsibility. So I think it's really good to keep in mind that the money committees don't just look at money going out, they also look at how much money is coming in and what will affect both of those sides of the equation.
Oh, Bob, we can't hear you if you can hear us. To fill time, I'll add to that comment too. Yeah, I mean, you could really just about with a straight face, you could refer everything to Finance and WAM because pretty much everything, at least tangentially, has some financial impact. And as chair of the Judiciary Committee, I don't actually think it makes any sense to refer bills that are about a crime that have the potential penalty of a fine in them. I don't think those should be referred to Ways and Means or Finance because it's such a minuscule part of it's not intended to raise money. It's just coincidental to the crime that you're describing. So I think you could also make a pretty strong argument the way the rules currently written that both judiciary committees could take just about everything because it does affect this almost always affects a statute somewhere. And we have statutory, our rule says statutory revision. Does it make sense to send everything to judiciary and to send everything to Ways and Means and Finance? No, it's just, you just got to draw the line in some rational place. When I was first in the House, I asked the majority leader at the time, I won't mention who it was. I said, why is everything referred to finance? And the person said to me, bill control. So it has definitely been used in the past as a way for leadership to let out the bills they want to let out and not let out the other ones. But I don't think that is where we're headed, and I don't think that actually makes any sense from a policy matter. Okay, Bob, I don't know if we can hear you yet or not. You back?
Hi, folks. He's not back yet. We're trying
Okay.
to see maybe on Bob. Was that you? Oh, no. We're gonna try to see if maybe he can exit and then come back to maybe that will might fix the audio. Apologies to everybody on the call. He's having some audio and video malfunctioning. Hopefully he'll be back in a little bit.
Well, if you just to fill, we have some of his questions, so I'm going to ask some of the questions that Bob had, just so that everybody's just not sitting here twiddling their thumbs. Everybody always asks about the use of effective defective dates. Would one of you like to comment on why we do that?
Sure, I got you.
All
It's a
right.
weird thing. It's a weird thing. So common practice, and it's not every single bill, every single committee, but common practice is that you will you will insert a date where a bill becomes effective. It could be upon approval, or it could be a date laid out in the future to allow time for implementation. That's kind of standard practice. But there's a legislative mechanism where a chair, when passing a bill out of the committee, will insert a date that is considered defective. So you may put a date in there, which means it does not go into effect until the year 2050 or the year 3000. Some chairs have picked a special date to them, like a date from a sci-fi novel. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a date that doesn't work. The reason for that is it ensures that prior to passage, the bill will have to be reconsidered. So if you're not 100% locked in on the details of a bill, or you think it's important that the House and the Senate come together at a future time to negotiate those differences, you put in a defective date, which ensures further debate down the road. Does that sound right, Linda?
Nope, that was good.
Solid.
Yeah, I would just add, sometimes we get questions about it because people are like, why do you want the bill to go into effect in the year 3000? And that's not the intention at all. It is exactly as Chair Todd said, it's a way of noting that the bill is still a work in progress and, needs to be revisited. Another way that it's helpful is that we are not able to pass any appropriation bills under our Constitution until we pass the budget first. So when we vote on the last day of reviewing bills in session, we always have to pass the budget first, and then all the appropriation bills can come after. So that's a big reason too why our appropriation bills often will blank the amounts and put in a defective date, just to ensure that we meet the constitutional requirement that the budget has to pass first. Bob, are you back?
To fill space too, I'll also add while
Yeah, go
Bob's
ahead.
coming back on is that in addition to what my colleagues have also shared, is that for those that are not familiar with the process, what you also want to do is look at the committee reports from the previous subject matters, because usually there can be recommendations, even though the appropriation amount might be blank, we could say like, oh, this would cost 5 million or 10 million. So when the finance chairs do receive it, they can look at the previous committee work and kind of have a gauge as to, okay, how much would this really cost if it's an appropriation type of bill.
I would just add, this does come. There's some tactics involved too. So there's some. This is the part of the legislative process that some people don't like, and I understand why. But some chairs will put a defective date on everything, whether or not they think the bill's ready to go or not. Typically, I'll only put it on a bill where I don't think it's ready. So I think the idea is a good one, but if the bill were to pass with that specific language, I would not be comfortable with it. So I'll put a bad date on it. But some chairs, even when they think the bill's ready, will put it on, and it's because they want bills to go to conference so that they can horse trade. And I don't know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's definitely a dumb thing. But it's very rare to see a bill go all the way through. Now, it's very rare to see it go all the way through unamended. It's also fairly rare just to see it go through without going to conference. Most everything goes to conference. All right, Bob, you back yet? Mako, what you think?
No, I don't think so. We're trying to do it on the back end. So if you can continue to moderate, that would be great.
Okay.
Great job already.
Let's see what else we got here. Well, let me go to some of the questions. One question that I think is a fair question, even though I have my own opinions about it, is employers not only need to pay wages, but they also need to pay unemployment tax. And if they offer insurance, they have to pay a portion of that as well, plus other expenses. So if you pay someone $14 an hour, you really are paying onwards of double or triple that an hour for that employee to be part of the organization. That's not sustainable either, especially for small business. Would anybody care to grasp that nettle?
I can speak on it if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fair. And I do think that one thing in the minimum wage conversation that we do owe, particularly the small business community and other employers, is we owe them a timeline and predictability. One thing that came up before we passed the last kind of round of increases, right, which will end in 2028 at $18 an hour. That's the next bump, right? Is we had folks who wanted immediate action. Let's go from $10 straight to 15, or let's go from $10 straight to even as high as like 22, right? And I think in my conversations, it's not so much that the wages are a problem as you need to give businesses time to plan, time to prepare, time to budget accordingly. So I think any increase, whether we're vetting it out this year or next year, prior to that 2028, we would be better off laying out a timeline so that businesses can adjust and adapt. And something that I've been reading about actually, because a lot of legislators will recommend a book, and you're reading about it. We have a lot of systems in place that place a lot of obligations on employers, and that's not the case all over the world, right? In Europe, you may place additional requirements on employers that we do not have in the United States. In most of Asia, they place that burden more on the individual in some places, or more on the state, right? So someone's got to pay, right? You're either going to have poorer outcomes when people lose jobs and fall into poverty, or the state's going to have to step in and you're going to have to collect taxes, which means someone's paying that, or you're going to place it on the employer. And that balance really just kind of determines kind of where you land. But it's a reasonable concern. And I think, one thing that we're really struggling with structurally in our state, right, is we don't have enough people to meet the demand of what's being asked of the labor force, right? We have people who are aging out, we have people who are moving away, which is why our unemployment rate is so low. But, in theory, if you always have a low unemployment rate, you would expect wages to grow faster than they currently are. And it's just, our economy is not necessarily producing at an increased rate, but we still have a labor shortage. So it's kind of a confluence of problems, and it does make things difficult. And it's something that gets debated anytime we discuss the minimum wage. In certain states, you may have a provision where large employers have a higher minimum wage. Or in certain areas, it's like, okay, you have a regional minimum wage in an urban core, right? The minimum wage needed for Hilo does not match what is necessary for urban Honolulu. But right now, it is set statewide, right? So those things come up, and they are debated for sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies to the people that logged on, and thank you very much, Senator Rhoads, for taking over. I'm glad I do the script, at least, that we can have at least some framework. I don't know. I either need a new camera or I need a new computer. but this has never happened before like this. I'll probably talk to Makamai, who's very tech savvy, and figure out what the heck happened. But anyway, thank you for just taking over. One other question. You've already, have you, I missed some of what you were talking about because I was going in and out. But because of, did you talk about homelessness and whether the legislature is going to be doing anything with regard to that? Because HUD, I think, is going to cut some funding for homeless issues, and that's going to impact us in Hawaii. So I don't know who can address that or at least talk about it.
Can talk about it to start with anyway. I represent Chinatown, of course. So for me, homelessness for years, for decades, I've lived there for almost 30 years now. And it's actually gotten better in Chinatown, but it does seem to me that it's also like spread out over the rest of the island and the state more than it used to. But one thing that we have done a lot of work on, and I think on the legal side of it, at least, we're almost done or maybe done, and that is for getting assistance for people with that are mentally ill. So what if you're really mentally ill and you've tried to stab somebody or you've tried to commit suicide, there's a legal process for putting you in the state hospital. And so there's, those are the worst of the worst, and they end up there. We passed I was still in the house, so probably 11 or 12 years ago now, a bill called the Assisted Community Treatment Act that is supposed to address those who are a danger to themselves. If they stand on the street forever, they're going to die because they're unable to identify that they have a mental illness. Whereas, if you have a broken arm, you can tell your arm is broken and you go to the hospital. With certain kinds of mental illness, you don't know. So what the ACT allows is a petition to be filed on their behalf, and ultimately it requires a medical plan, which can also include mandatory taking of medication. So those are for the people who are sort of the next rung down. And that process is also in place. It is only now, I think, starting to ramp up. I mean, the Institute for Human Services uses it routinely, and there are quite a number of people who are no longer living on the street with mental illness that were. And then, of course, is sort of the most difficult of the homeless people to assist and to help. And then below that, then you can offer consensual stuff. And the problem there is we just don't have enough beds to put people that need certain kinds of help. And then it becomes a money problem because like a lot of things become a money problem because you got to have the resources. So I would say, and then of course the homeless, the housing part of it, of course, is part of that too. And I would say that we have, I didn't jump in earlier, but basically everything that the Hawaii Public Housing Authority runs or develops is rental housing. So since I've been there, we've Kukui Gardens was purchased by the state for affordable housing. That's all rental. 888 Evil A, that's all affordable housing. It's all rental. The city did Hawai'i on River Street, which is a senior affordable housing. If you drive down School Street in Lanakila, there's a building going up there. It's many stories tall. That's also going to be all, I believe that's entirely rental senior housing as well. And of course, we're finally getting around to redeveloping mayor right homes. Some of that, I believe, will be for purchase, or it'll be market rate, because the new conventional wisdom is that you don't want to put all the poor people in one place and leave them there. It's a slum, basically. It's a ghetto, and that's not desirable. In any case, the housing part of it does factor in the homeless. If there's no cheap place to live, you're going to be sleeping on the beach or in your car.
While I was having a problem, did you talk about the fact that a lot of bills go into conference? Because there was a question that says it's irritating that everything goes to conference for what they consider horse trading. What will legislators do to make the conference committee much more transparent to the public?
We did touch on it. I didn't.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
I'm sure the answer I gave would not satisfy to that person. But if other people want to comment, of course, that's great by me.
Chris,
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. I honestly think most of it just comes down to our calendar. A lot of legislative practices, especially your first year in office, don't make a lot of sense. And when you factor in how many pieces of legislation and having multiple committee hearings and the length of our calendar, then it becomes much easier to understand why everything just gets compressed into one time period. And and that makes it more difficult to have an extensive public conversation on the final details, right? During the hearing process, you can talk things over at length, and you'll have multiple opportunities on the House floor, Senate floor, in various committee hearings. But when you get to conference, there's just not enough time. Until that part changes, you're going to continue to run into the same issues, though.
There were, in all the years that I've been lobbying, there were a couple instances when the bill was pretty clear before it went to conference. I thought, anyway. But, obviously I'm biased looking at, my client's position on the bill. But I was trying to convince both sides to get rid of the defective effective date because everything was agreed upon, but it still went to conference. And I got it done in conference, but these are some of the issues that I think come up, from time to time. But the fact that it goes to conference, it was just a fact of life for lobbyists. So, you just deal with it. But this is an interesting question as we kind of wind down, but what is something you wish you knew sooner as an elected official? What is your advice to anyone thinking of running for office later? All of you are veterans in elections.
Maybe I'll go first because I have the least amount of combined service, I think, given Brandon's time on the council.
Well, by the way, just for the audience, Rep. Todd was appointed to take over the position when Rep. Cliff Tsuji from the Big Island passed away. And so, but that was 2017. And then subsequent to that, he got reelected each 2 years. Go ahead. Sorry.
I would say my number one piece of advice is to get invested in your community prior to running. I think it's very common because you have people who are interested in politics and are passionate about it and want to do a good thing, that they'll run before they have any community ties, or they'll move districts to a place they've never lived. I think it's much more important that you invest in your community, establish that base, fully understand like how your community works before entering office. I think most of us have some sort of background like that. Like for me, I kind of grew up around politics, but also I was coaching in my community, multiple sports. I was working at a really popular small business, working with local fishermen. There's a bunch of different versions of that, but I think that investment prior to running is important because you may not win, and then you still have that investment and you're still making a difference. I think the first thing that you enter, and almost everyone is very smart. There's a lot of very, very bright, smart people, and I think my big takeaway early on is I would always think, why is this done this way? Why are our outcomes like this? And once you're in, and I think it's different on the council, but when you're in the legislature and you see that there are 76 of us, plus the administration, and then you have all of these agencies interacting, and you have the councils, and you have the mayors, and it's easy to understand once you're there that you have everyone trying to have their vision made clear, and you're going to end up with kind of a melting pot of ideas. But that means compromise, and it frequently leads to outcomes that are compromised. And I think that's one of the difficulties is you end up with a lot of things that are kind of half solutions. But when you get everyone together in the room, it's easier to understand that that's how things end up.
Rep. Todd, your vice chair, Representative Jenna Takenouchi, who I dealt with for many years as she was the office manager for Rep. Ono. And she really knew the process in the legislature. So when she decided to run for office and was prepared and got elected, she really had tremendous background already. So I think that really helped if somebody is a staff member at the ledge.
Probably something like 1/3 of all state legislators were staff at some point, if I had to guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can also add to that, Bob, probably going on the next person next to Rep Todd on years of experience, just right after, or right, in that sense. I started off as a staff member, and Rep Todd is correct. You have to invest in your community. I had great mentors throughout my career, and one of them was the late Senator Harimoto, who is the current seat that I currently serve on, and he was really invested in the community. He says you have to go out and meet the people. So I started off, even though I started off as a coach and high school teacher in my previous life. I was on the neighborhood board. I was a staff assistant on the city council, and then eventually kind of rose up through that way. So it is a lot of fun. It's enjoyable, and when the moment it becomes not fun and enjoyable, then it's something to decide, okay, this is something I should continue to do. But I think like all of us, we have grown up and lived in the district we represent. We love what we do. There's a lot of smart people in the room, and there's a lot of things for us to learn as we go through that. But if you're thinking about it, I would just encourage folks to just get involved in the community and ask around, ask the community leaders before making that jump leap, because it can be nervous and exciting and thrilling. But at the same time, it could also be very rewarding when you can make a true impact, especially in the communities that you live in.
Let's see, I'm looking to see if somebody had written in, can the state fund health insurance so that small business has a leg up? Well, there have been questions and issues throughout the years about whether you have a all-inclusive health system. And I think that this will probably come up in this session because HMSA and HPH are thinking about forming a partnership, not necessarily a merger, but a partnership. So I think that issue will probably come up, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that offhand. But as we go ahead.
I was just going to comment real quick that it's hard for me to the American healthcare system is such a bizarre creature. And if you look at the macro numbers, we pay close to twice as much as all the industrialized countries, and we have the exact same outcomes in terms of life expectancy. In fact, we're lower than some other places in average life expectancy. So we have a very strange system. We would have to raise taxes to have a nationalized or statewide system, but small business would actually pay less in healthcare costs if they just paid for it through a single payer. And if you look at Massachusetts is the other state that is even more comprehensive than we are in terms of their coverage. My guess is if you compare, I haven't seen the stats, but there's a lot of advantages to scale. And my guess is small businesses pay less for health coverage there, even though their taxes are higher.
Senator Rhoads, there are a lot of discussion, generally about single payer system. Whether Hawaii will ever move to that because of our prepaid health, et cetera, remains to be seen. But it will probably be less expensive.
It took an ERISA exemption to get us the prepaid health, so it's kind of locked into place
Yes.
until something happens at the national level. But
Yeah.
But we are. I mean, compared to most states, we're great. I mean, we trade number one and number two in terms of coverage between Massachusetts and us on a regular basis.
And even Vice Speaker talked about workforce development. The most recent statistic show us in terms of unemployment that we're one of the best in the country, lowest. But with all the potential changes that we all know about, it's gets scary at times as to what could happen. And I'm just hoping. I always worry about a disaster. I mean, like a hurricane. That always bothers me. That something like that could happen, and We just need to be prepared. Any last comments by the panel? I think we're at the end.
Thanks so much for bringing us together.
Oh, no, thank you for participating. And just for the audience, we spent time going over the different topics, trying to pick out what we think would be most meaningful to you. And again, my apologies for the problem that I had with the audio and video and the panel taking over. But I want to thank, the panel, Senator Rhoads, Senator Elefante, Vice Speaker Ichiyama, and Finance Chair Todd for their participation. And this will go on YouTube. And Makamai Namahoe and I will be talking about sending out a survey later that if you get it and have the time to at least fill it out, we would really appreciate that. But thank you very much, panel. Thank you, audience, and have a very productive session, all of you. Thank you. Bye.